would like to introduce you all to our voice of inspiration, Susie. Susie is grateful to be an alumna of the Renfrew Center of Baltimore, Maryland. She resides in Parkville, Maryland with her fiance and two cats. She is a former teacher turned HR administrator who spends her free time playing games, listening to podcasts, watching true crime documentaries, and reporting diet ads on social media for being false or misleading content, which I think we can all agree with. She hopes to use her experience to change people's understanding of eating disorders and those affected. So I want to welcome Susie.
Hi, everyone. Thank you, Erin, for that introduction. That was a lovely intro. My name is Susie. I came through, like Erin said, the Renfrew Center in Baltimore. I'll get into kind of like my journey with Renfrew. I just want to give you a little bit of background about me and kind of go into like where I am in recovery now and my big takeaways. So, I have always, like from birth, been a fat person. And I say the word fat as a descriptor, not as like a self-deprecating insult to myself, but just in the same way that I would say I have blue eyes and brown hair. I'm a fat person. And that has been a struggle for me from as long as I can remember. I guess from the time I was like old enough to understand that people don't really like it when you're fat for some reason, which was in early childhood. People would make comments and stuff like that about my weight, and it always just seemed really strange to me. Because I didn't really see anything wrong with my body or the way I looked. And I think a lot of people have experienced that from a lot of like reading and research that I've done. But when the world's constantly telling you that your body is wrong in some way, that becomes like really internalized really quickly. So my experience with my body was always that my goal was to change it. And I didn't really see anything wrong with wanting to change my body because the whole world was constantly telling me like that should be my goal. So I had been like dieting and doing all these fad diets for as long as I can remember. And it wasn't until college that I think it really became apparent what I was doing. When I was a freshman in college, I was diagnosed with polycystic ovarian syndrome, and I had a doctor recommend basically restricting as a treatment for PCOS. And she put me on a really restrictive diet. And I got to the point where most of my freshman year of college, I was eating a chef salad in mid afternoon. And that's it every day. And I didn't see anything wrong with this because the feedback that I got was, you look so good. How you got it? You're getting so much healthier. Like, good for you. And nobody really told me, like, hey, this isn't healthy. Because when you're a fat person, the goal is to change your body. So as long as your body is changing, it doesn't really matter what your method is. So that was the messaging that I consistently got, and I went back and forth between restricting and binging for a lot of years. I think that's kind of a lot of people's MO is like, obviously restricting turns out to not be super sustainable, and then sometimes you go to the other end and binge, and that's kind of the cycle that I was stuck in. And it never occurred to me until after I graduated college, graduated grad school, and started teaching that I had an issue. Right before I graduated, I lost someone really close to me to cancer, and that obviously was life-changing, but that really took me on a downward spiral of like depression, anxiety, and binging. And it wasn't until I started binging so much that I physically had to, like, felt like I had to purge, that I was like, I think what I'm doing might be disordered. And it's funny to me now to look back because I recognize now that my behavior from childhood on was disordered, but it wasn't until I had that moment um, as an adult that I was like, this might not be what I should be doing. And so I reached out to Renfrew. Um, and I was really lucky as a teacher to have summers off, obviously, to focus completely on recovery. And I started the day program. And in the day program, obviously the groups were amazing, and I made a lot of close connections with other women in the group, and I was very grateful. And something that kept coming up in the day program, in body image groups and also in UT, is like this notion of body positivity. And so we talk about body positivity a lot in recovery, and recognizing that all bodies are beautiful and acceptable and all of that great stuff. And in a lot of these conversations with people in group and also therapists in group, it seemed like everyone's advice is like, if you can't get to a place of body positivity, start with body neutrality. Just say something that's neutral about your body, like, oh, my body can do this, like my body got me up and got me to group today, like just focus on those things that are neutral. And it always felt like to me like the messaging was body neutrality is a stepping stone to body positivity. And as I got further and further into my recovery, I started thinking about how that might not really work for me. I feel like body neutrality is kind of my end goal, because to me, body neutrality means understanding your value outside of your body. When we talk about body positivity, we talk about like saying positive things about what your body can do and accepting all bodies. And that sounds great, but in my mind, what I've discovered is that still focuses on your body. And so my goal now in recovery is to get to a place of body neutrality where my body doesn't define anything about my character, doesn't define anything about my worth. And so that's really what I'm working on at this point, is to get to a place of true body neutrality. And I just think the difference there is subtle, but strong enough that it really changed my mindset. So that's kind of where I am in my journey. And I just wanted to share about that experience of that light bulb and how body neutrality really changed the game for me, because it doesn't have to be uh, a goal to get to a place where you're fully accepting of your body. If you can get to a place where you're fully accepting of yourself outside of your body, that has been a game changer for me, just that notion. And it's really difficult in recovery as a fat person or a person in a larger body to hear that so many people in recovery, their biggest fear is gaining weight, and essentially in my mind thinking their biggest fear is becoming something that I already am. So what does that mean about me? And so that was a big struggle for me in a lot of groups. And I think that body neutrality really helped me to understand that everyone has kind of come up in this same toxic diet culture. And my goal now is to kind of help people get away from that and focus more on like worth and value outside of what your body looks like. So I'm really grateful to have kind of been on this journey, and happy to discuss it. And I'm just continuing on with this journey to body neutrality. So that's my story. Hopefully you can find something you related to in it. And I know we have like a Q&A, Erin. Yeah.
Yes, we do. Yeah. So any questions you all have for Susie, please put them in the Q&A or in the chat. One that we can kind of start out with, Susie, is just what has been your biggest struggle in recovery, and how have you been able to continue working on your recovery through that struggle?
So my biggest struggle has been consistency, I would say. Consistency obviously is really key in recovery, and as we work toward like in nutrition groups, we always talk about following the meal plan consistently kind of changes how your body is reacting to food and what you need. And so having that consistency is really key for intuitive eating, which is really important. So that's been my biggest struggle, is just staying consistent on the meal plan and in recovery. I would say like how I work through that struggle, something that I learned in a group from another person who's been in recovery is, and something that I think about all the time, it's been kind of like a mantra, is that every meal is another chance to choose recovery. So even if I haven't been consistent, um, just recognizing that it's not an all or nothing situation, and that I can choose recovery at each meal each day has been really important for me.
Yeah. Yeah, and I love that idea of kind of looking at it like piece by piece. That yeah, we want to be consistent, and consistency doesn't mean perfection.
Right.
Yeah.
Yeah. Yeah.
Another question we have is any examples that you can give to the group just about how you try to talk to yourself in that like body neutral kind of language.
Sure. Yeah, I think the biggest one for me is like recognizing I we always talk about like adding thoughts to your, it's hard to change your thinking, it's easier to add thoughts to your thinking. So for
Yeah.
me, something is like when I'm body checking or I'm noticing something about my body, I just add the thought, and that does not define my worth. This my weight is fluctuating, my worth does not fluctuate. Things like that just really help me to to help just change the way my brain thinks about what my body looks like. So just adding that little mantra of like, yes, I noticed this about my body, and also it changes nothing about me as a person.
Yeah.
Yeah.
Yeah, I love that option because it's so like it is something that you can just kind of add in when because you're already having the other thoughts, right? Like we're not getting rid of those anytime soon, more than likely. If we can add in those other ones though and remind ourselves, oh, okay, I can have this thought and it doesn't impact my worth.
Mhm.
That's so awesome. Um, One other question we had, Susie, is what are you most grateful for in your recovery?
I think about this a lot actually. I am most grateful for my relationship. I'm getting married in February, and I'm very acutely aware of the fact that I would not be where I am in my relationship if I had not been in recovery. I actually met my fiance while I was in treatment. And it just really gave me a space, like being in treatment and being in group and having a lot of therapy gave me a space to work through a lot of stuff that I didn't necessarily even know was like coming up for me in relationships. So um I had a pattern of like just bailing out of dating people when I felt like they were getting too close or knowing too many things about me. And I just my therapist at Renfrew, when I started dating my current fiance, was kind of like, okay, but what if you have those thoughts and then just don't bail on it? Just live in the fear, tolerate that, see how that goes. And so I'm very aware that I would not be getting married in February had I not been in treatment when I met my fiance. So that's the thing I'm most grateful for. And then I would say just also relationships in general. Like it's a lot easier to have close friends when you can be honest about what you're dealing with, and we know that eating disorders live in secrecy, so I think that kind of eliminating that secrecy has definitely brought me a lot closer in my relationships with other people as well.
Yeah. Yeah, I love that idea of like again, you're going to have those thoughts. And what if we don't do anything about them? What if we just stay and we tolerate that emotion?
Yeah, that's one of my favorite takeaways, is just like I can be afraid and still do the thing. Like both things can live in my head at once.
Yeah.
um, that's a game changer too.
Yeah. I love it. This probably kind of goes along with this, but someone is asking just like how you've tolerated those weight fluctuations you may have had in recovery. Um,
Yeah, so I haven't weighed myself since I exited recovery. Um, I choose not to. And I'm kind of vocal about that with people. So it's like a really weird thing where people feel really comfortable commenting on your body if they feel like you've lost weight. They think it's like a compliment, and it's not necessarily. And so I, in the past couple years, have gotten really good at people saying, "Oh, like you look like you've lost weight," and I just like don't know. I don't weigh myself. And they're like, "Oh, okay." Like, and some people will be like, "Oh, I can't. I weigh myself every day," and I'm like, "Why? What does it change about you?" Um, so it's just like kind of being open about like that's a boundary I drew for myself. I do not step on the scale unless it's medically necessary for me to, and I think that just really helps take that anxiety out of my life.
Yeah. You brought up the medical piece. How do you advocate for yourself with medical professionals who, unfortunately, a lot don't understand eating disorders and they don't understand the idea of health at every size? So, how do you kind of navigate that?
Yeah, I still struggle with this one because I'm a very non-confrontational person, and so something I'm working at now is being a little bit more assertive in all areas of my life. But I just discovered the power of no thank you a couple years ago. Like after I was first discharged from treatment in 2018. And after that, I kind of like the first time I went to the doctor and the nurse was like, "Can you step on the scale?" I was like, "No, thanks." And she was just like, "Okay." And then we like moved on. And I never like knew that I could say no until I was in Renfrew. So and I just think like the power of no thank you, and then also just asking questions like if they insist, like, well, why is it medically necessary for you to know my weight? Like, there are very few reasons that a doctor would need to know your exact weight. And if it's something for like dosing or whatever, you might have to tolerate like that discomfort. But I just feel like why put myself like give myself that anxiety if it's not medically necessary for me to do that. So yeah, just like no thank you. That's my biggest like tool that I use at the doctor.
I love it though, because I mean, it's one of those situations I think we all get in and we forget that we can say no. That like they're asking us to do something and we're paying them to do these things and we could say, no, I don't want that.
Yeah. So yeah, that's yeah. That I mean, I would highly recommend like unless obviously you're like with your dietitian or your treatment team and you need to do weigh-ins, but like if you're with your regular doctor and they don't really need to know your weight, like why do it? I think there's a certain point where we do have to tolerate discomfort and stuff, but I also think it's okay to have a boundary.
Yeah, yeah, I completely agree with you. That's awesome. So, Susie, what would you tell someone um, who was struggling to accept? Like, how do you approach other people outside of yourself who struggle to accept body neutrality?
Um, that's a hard one. So I kind of talked a little bit before about just like speaking from my experience. Like people say like, "Oh, you look like you've lost weight," and I'm like, "Don't know. I haven't weighed myself." And just kind of leading from there, like those comments of like, why is that a compliment? I set a goal for myself earlier this year that I've been following is to not say thank you when people tell me I look like I've lost weight. Um, I don't say thank you anymore because I don't take it as a compliment, because it doesn't add any value to my life to be smaller. Um, so that's a big thing is like setting that boundary in my own head of like not saying thank you when people comment on my body because I don't think it's appropriate. And then also another thing that kind of has helped is having some canned answers for things that come up often. Like I used to be a teacher, so I'm obviously like around kids a lot, and parents have a tendency to want to like shush their kids when they make comments about people's bodies. Like they'll be like, "Oh, that lady has a big tummy," and her parents like, "Shh, like don't say that. You can't say that." And so I started saying to kids like, "Yeah, I do. Isn't it cool how everyone's bodies look different?" And like that changed the game for me too of like controlling that conversation. So I think like it's just small steps and like having those pre-planned like answers in your brain if if a situation comes up repeatedly.
Mhm. Yeah. Well, and I think that's such a good point. A lot of it is like our interpretation of what the other person is saying that really impacts our emotions as opposed to what it is that they're actually saying.
Yeah, and I as a teacher, I taught middle school, so obviously like this comes up a lot with middle school kids, and something that I would say to them also, they would be like, "Oh, like so and so called me fat." And I'm like, "Well, are you?" And they're like, "Well, kind of." And I'm like, "Okay, then like congratulate them on their power of sight." I don't like it's not a bad word. Like I'm like that's how I react if someone's like, "You're fat." I'm like, "Yes, I'm glad you can see well. Like good eye test." You know, it's like it doesn't necessarily have to be this big like insulting thing
Yeah.
because people have different bodies and like that's fine.
Yeah. Well, and I love that idea of like taking the power away from it. Like, where did that power even come from in that word? And we have the ability to change it for at least ourselves. And, hopefully, if enough of us change it,
Mhm.
we'll be able to create more change. How have you asked for help if at any point in time you've been through treatment and then needed kind of a tune-up or a checkup, as we like to call them? How has it been to kind of ask for that help when you feel like maybe you're supposed to be at a different place?
Oh, that's a good question. Um, I think a good um like a way to set yourself up for success is knowing who those people are that you can go to and feel comfortable. And I'm lucky to have a few of them in my life that I know I can say like, "Hey, I'm like not doing well. If you could just check in with me, that'd be good." Um, and I think if you're not comfortable, something that has I have also found to be really helpful is like the internet. Um, you can find groups of anyone on the internet. Like you can go on Facebook and search. I'm literally in a Facebook group called Eating Disorder Support for People in Larger Bodies. Like it's that specific. And so I think like curating my social media has also been really helpful to the point where like if I don't feel comfortable going to someone in my real life, I have like internet friends I can go to also. So I would definitely like recommend anyone curate their social media with people who are like supportive and um, posting ideas that they can relate to and agree with.
Yeah, I love that. And kind of going along with that, anything that you found helpful when trying to kind of direct or like yeah, trying to guide like your supports on how best to support you, like any phrases or anything you've told them like, hey, definitely try this, don't try this, whatever it might be.
Yeah, I think for me, sometimes I don't know that something's not helpful until it happens. And so just kind of, and not try not to accuse people, but just kind of saying like, hey, that wasn't helpful. like, um, yeah, I think like just like, hey, that's not helpful. Here's what would be helpful is powerful. It's a good conversation starter. And even saying like, I like thank you for trying, but here's what I need. I think you can show appreciation and gratitude without like letting people cross your boundaries.
Hmm. I love that. I love that. If you could go back and tell yourself something at the beginning of your recovery journey, what would it be?
uh nobody's grading you.
Nobody what?
Nobody is grading you on how well you do in recovery. um I was like, and I think a lot of people that I've encountered in eating disorder recovery can relate to this a lot, like being a perfectionist and being like very black and white thinking. And I've always been that way. And so when I started recovery, I was very like, I'm going to do everything perfectly. Like, this is going to be great. This is going to be awesome. I'm going to do every food emotion journal. It's going to be amazing. And that's what I did for like a while in recovery. And actually, Erin, I think you at my graduation, the gift that you gave me was failure. Because you're like, you need to let yourself fail sometimes. Like, it's going to be okay. You're going to bounce back. You're going to survive. And I think that was like really something that I needed to hear, and something that I've needed to hear a lot throughout my life is like, you don't get a grade for this. Like, you don't have to do it perfectly. Like, just try your best, make some progress. It's going to be okay.
Hmm.
Yeah.
Yeah. Well, and I think that is such a common thing, and I'm sure others listening can relate. Of like, we almost take like the structure and rigidity of the eating disorder, and it's like, and now I'm going to put that into recovery, and it's hard to break that.
It is, yeah.
Yeah, definitely. Um, what would you say to someone who doesn't always feel like they fit in like the eating disorder recovery community?
Oh, we need you. Um, that's what I would say. Because I definitely have felt that of like, you know, all the people in media that we see represented in the eating disorder community or as eating disorder recovered people or people working at recovery, they kind of do fit into like people's normal perception of what an eating disorder looks like. And I would say like the more people that we can have who are open about being in recovery, who don't fit that like mold, um, the wider people's perceptions of what eating disorders are is going to be. So I would say if you feel like, you don't fit into this mold, like we need you even more so. Um, just to change people's perceptions of it.
Yeah, I love that. And I love the genuineness of like, we need you. Like, no, come in. Like,
Yeah.
because it is true. I mean, eating disorders are not, they're not a stereotype. They're not, for lack of a better phrase, one size fits all. It's diverse, and we want to be able to see that representation, because can almost guarantee there's someone else who can relate to that.
Yeah, and I do have a big fear of people kind of dismissing my recovery because of the way I look, or treating it like it's a joke because of the way I look, like, and so that's been something that is on my mind a lot. And I look at people, I don't know if anyone knows like Tess Holiday, who's a plus size model who just recently vocalized that she's been in eating disorder treatment. I look at how she's being treated in the media, and half of me is like, I never want to talk about this again. I don't want people to think of me that way. And half of me is like, I need to tell everyone this because, like, people don't understand the wide range of people who can have eating disorders. So,
Mhm.
yeah.
Yeah. How did you decide like when and how vocal you wanted to be with your story?
I would say I'm definitely still like trickling out to broader audiences, I guess. I feel like for me, like speaking here, this is I feel more of a safe space. And talking to other people who have been through recovery who understand is like a really good place to start. Just sharing your experience with other people who have similar lived experiences. And so that's where I've started. And I think I'm motivated to kind of trickle that out to other people in my life. So like a lot of my like friends and family know I'm not as vocal with strangers just because you never know how that's going to go. But I do feel like as it comes up naturally, I'm kind of more inclined to be like, well, actually, like I've been to treatment for an eating disorder. Like this is why, and having these conversations about like weight loss and like dieting, I feel a little bit more like it's a natural place to be like, well, actually, like that kind of thinking doesn't really work for me, and here's why. And like kind of just looking for those openings where it comes up naturally.
Hmm. Yeah. I think that's such a good idea. Like, you start off in the areas you feel comfortable. It's kind of like learning how to swim. You don't jump off the high dive the first time. That's not going to be good for a small child. Like, you start in the baby pool and then you kind of work your way up, for sure.
Yeah.
Awesome. What does your support team look like now?
Yeah, so this is a long story, but I made a really tough decision to leave teaching at the end of last year. And I like my job now, but I'm currently uninsured, which complicates my situation a lot. So I lean on Renfrew. I actually go to the virtual outpatient group every week as like just a touch point for my recovery. And it's something that I'm able to self pay for and stay like with my foot in the recovery pool all the time without having an actual treatment team. So once I am insured at my new job, I would love to get back to having like a true treatment team, but definitely Renfrew has been a great resource for me. Like doing the alumni events, doing the outpatient group has been a good resource for me during this like weird transitional time. So
Yeah.
I'm grateful for that for sure.
Yeah. Well, and I think that's so important to remember, like, because all of our circumstances change at different points in life. And like, still finding those resources we can access and making sure we do so that we keep supporting our recovery. What would you say to someone who's been working on their recovery for a while, um, as a way to kind of help them kind of stay on that path and keep moving forward?
Yeah, I think for me, what works for me is, like I said before, recognizing that every moment is a choice and not like I get overwhelmed when I think about I have to do this for the rest of my life. Like that's a lot to deal with. And so I'm like, I'm gonna do it right now. And I'm gonna get through right now. And then in the next moment, I might make a different choice, but this is what I'm doing now. So I think just practicing that mindfulness, staying in the present moment, not trying to look too far ahead has been really valuable for me.
Yeah. I love that idea because I think it is like so hard to think about like, wait, I've got to feel these emotions for the rest of my life and not avoid them. Like, okay, it's a
Yeah.
lot of work.
I mean, yeah, and recover, like nutrition is a lot of work and like body image is a lot of work. So when you put all these things together, it becomes overwhelming really fast. And when you think about it as like a lifelong journey, but for me, it's just like, I'm going to do this now. And just right now, that's all I'm focused on.
Yeah, I love it. All right, and last question, because I know that you were a teacher and you love books.
Yeah.
If you could erase certain words or connotations from the world's vocabulary, what would you choose to kind of take out?
Mm, um, well, I would definitely take the connotative meaning out of fat. Like, I don't really understand why that's such a like difficult word for people. I would remove that. Like, let's just make that neutral. That'd be great. And then I also something that makes me like a big pet peeve of mine now um is seeing the words guilt free in advertising.
Oh, yeah.
I would take that out. Like all foods are guilt free. You shouldn't feel guilty about eating anything. So I would take that out as well. Guilt free as far as like any food that just needs to go.
Yeah. Yeah. I know the fact that the moral connection to food has become that like strong and significant, we're now advertising it is like, oh, that's not a good thing.
No, because the messaging there is like, if you eat this other version of this food, you should feel guilty about it. But you shouldn't. All foods fit.
Yep. Yep. I love it. All right. Well, Susie, thank you so much for sharing your story today. I think it's so important that, we hear from people at different points in their recovery and the different journeys everyone takes because, this isn't a straight line. It's on an unobstructed line. It's a journey and it's step by step, kind of like you're saying. So I'm so glad our alumni were able to hear from you today and hear a little bit about your story. And